I ruined someone's career with 2 sentences. Or no. That's not exactly true. See, even now I still do that. I still reach for language that softens things just enough so I can sit next to it without fully hating myself. I didn't ruin her life. But I changed something. Quietly. Deliberately. And for years I convinced myself it barely counted. I kept the voicemail for 3 years. Not from an ex-husband. Not from my mother. Not from somebody who died. From her. From the woman whose life I tilted sideways. And then spent years pretending I hadn't. I still have it. I haven't listened to it in maybe 8 months now, but I know exactly where it is. You know how sometimes your phone feels heavier because there's something inside it you're avoiding? That's what this feels like. Like carrying around evidence. And the voicemail isn't angry. That's the part that really gets me. If she had screamed at me, maybe this would all feel simpler somehow. Easier to categorize. Easier to defend against. But she didn't scream. He sounded tired. I'll get to that. I need to do this in the right order or I'll lose my nerve halfway through. Because I've tried to tell this story before. To my therapist. To myself. Once after too much wine sitting alone in my kitchen at 1 a.m. while everybody else was asleep. But every single time I get close to the truth I start rearranging it. Explaining it too early. Making it sound more reasonable than it actually was. I don't want to do that this time. So, I'm 45 now. And when I was 38 I changed a document at work in a way that affected another person's future. Not dramatically overnight. This wasn't some movie moment where security escorted her out carrying a cardboard box. Life isn't usually that cinematic. That's part of why people get away with things. No. This was smaller. Quieter. 2 sentences. 2 attribution changes. And somehow that was enough. I worked at the same company for 7 years. Corporate environment. Financial services adjacent. Endless meetings. Bad coffee. People saying phrases like, touch base offline with completely straight faces. But I built something there. I really did. I gave that place years of my life. I missed anniversaries. I answered emails from hospital waiting rooms. I once took a conference call sitting on the floor outside my daughter's dance recital because somebody thought a quarterly report looked concerning. At the time I told myself all of it mattered. Now, I'm not sure if I believed in the work itself or if I just needed to feel important to something. There's a difference. I didn't understand that then. There was a woman I worked closely with. I'll call her Dana. Not her real name. Dana and I became close the way coworkers sometimes do when you survive enough pressure together. You know each other in this strangely intimate way. You know whose marriage is struggling. Who cries in bathroom stalls after executive meetings. Who secretly takes anxiety medication before presentations. That was us. Late night texts. Spreadsheet emergencies. Gossip. Complaints. Inside jokes. I trusted her. But I really trusted her. And I think she trusted me too. That's what makes this feel so ugly now. Because this story would honestly be easier if she'd been awful. Manipulative. Cruel. But she wasn't. Neither of us were. That's the uncomfortable part. Then the promotion opened up. Big promotion. Executive track kind of thing. The kind people wait years for. And both of us were candidates. Nobody officially said it out loud, but everybody knew. That silence changed everything. We still got coffee together every morning. Still laughed in meetings. Still covered for each other when one of us was overwhelmed. But underneath all of it was this constant tension neither of us acknowledged. Who got praised more? Who executives copied on emails? Who got credit in meetings? Tiny things. Tiny things become enormous once your identity gets tangled up with winning. And 6 weeks before the decision, I found out Dana had spoken to somebody senior about my work on a project. Something she said implied I'd mishandled part of it. Not completely false. Not completely true either. Enough to shift perception. And I found out through somebody who absolutely was not supposed to tell me. That should have been the moment I stepped back. A healthy person probably would have thought, this situation is becoming toxic. I didn't. I panicked. No, panic isn't even the right word. I felt threatened. Humiliated. Because suddenly this thing I thought I'd earned fairly no longer felt fair anymore. And once your brain decides the game is unfair, you start giving yourself permission. I didn't understand that at the time. But later that night, sitting alone at my kitchen table with that document open in front of me, I crossed a line so quietly I almost convinced myself it wasn't a line at all. And the worst part? I felt calm while doing it. Because the scariest thing wasn't changing the document. It was how easy it became to keep smiling at her afterward. The document was a project review. That's it. No forged signatures. No fake numbers. No giant fraud scandal. Just a report. One of those polished corporate documents people pretend to read carefully while secretly skimming for conclusions. Dana and I were both contributors on the project. Both listed as leads in different sections. And everybody knew this report would influence the promotion decision even though nobody officially admitted that out loud. That's how those places work. Nothing important is ever said directly. I remember the exact night I changed it. Dishwasher running. My daughter asleep upstairs. Laptop open at the kitchen table. And I kept rereading this one section over and over again. Here's the thing that still bothers me. The original wording wasn't even unfair. Not really. It just framed Dana slightly more strongly than me. Slightly. You know how two versions of the truth can both technically be accurate while creating completely different impressions? That's what this was. The report positioned her as the strategic lead on a section we had honestly handled together. Maybe I did slightly more work. Maybe. But not enough to justify what I eventually did. I stared at those paragraphs for 20 minutes. And I wish I could tell you there was this huge moral battle happening inside me. That alarms were going off in my head. That some part of me was screaming, "Don't do this." That's not what happened. What happened was quieter. More dangerous. I started reasoning. Well, she already undermined me. Well, this wording is skewed anyway. Well, I'm just correcting the framing. Framing. God, I hid inside that word for years. I changed 2 sentences. 2 sentence adjustments and 2 attribution references. No fabricated data. No invented accomplishments. Nothing somebody could easily point at and call fake. But together they shifted the center of gravity. Suddenly I looked like the strategic driver. Dana looked more secondary. Collaborative instead of leading. Subtle. Very subtle. I remember leaning back in my chair afterward and feeling this weird rush of relief. Not guilt. Relief. Like balance had been restored. I actually thought, hey, now it's fair. That thought still horrifies me. Because what kind of person feels righteous while quietly manipulating reality? Apparently, me. The next morning Dana thanked me for cleaning up formatting issues in the report. I can still hear her saying it. Thanks for handling that last night. I was exhausted. And I smiled. I smiled and said, no problem. I was already in there anyway. That sentence makes me feel physically sick now. Because that was the moment. Not the edits. The lying afterward. That was the first real point where I could have stopped this entire thing from becoming what it became. I could have confessed. Reverted the edits. Said literally anything. Instead I acted normal. And honestly, that became the pattern for the next several years of my life. Normal on the outside. Compartmentalized underneath. I got very good at that. 3 weeks later I got the promotion. Conference room. Glass walls. Executive handshake. All the usual corporate language about leadership trajectory and future vision. And this is important. I felt amazing. I need to tell the truth about that because people always want guilt to arrive immediately. Like lightning. Like punishment. Sometimes it doesn't. Sometimes you get exactly what you wanted and it feels incredible for a while. I called my husband from the parking garage. Called my sister. We went out to dinner that weekend. My daughter made me a congratulations card with glitter glue all over it. I still have it somewhere. Everybody kept saying, "You earned this." And every time somebody said it, I felt this tiny pulse in my chest. Not enough to ruin the happiness. Just enough to notice. That's the thing about guilt in the beginning. It whispers. Quietly. Politely. You can ignore it if you stay busy enough. And I stayed very busy. Dana congratulated me too. That somehow hurt worse. She walked into my office the next morning carrying coffee and said, "Guess I work for you now." Joking. Sort of. And I laughed. But there was something different in her face. Something restrained. At the time I interpreted it as disappointment. Maybe jealousy. No. I think she already suspected something. Not enough to accuse me directly. Not concretely. But instinctively. Because when you know somebody closely, You feel when reality shifts half an inch sideways. You notice tone changes, missing fingerprints, tiny hesitations. And from that point on, our friendship started eroding in this quiet, invisible way. No fight. No confrontation. Just distance. He stopped texting me late at night. Stopped confiding in me. Stopped lingering after meetings. And I let it happen. That's not true. I encouraged it by pretending nothing was wrong. That's the part that wakes me up now. Not the document. The eye contact. For 2 years, I sat across conference tables from her pretending everything between us was normal while silently benefiting from something she couldn't fully prove. That changes you. Even if nobody else sees it immediately. And I didn't realize it then. But the worst moment in this story still hadn't happened yet. Not even close. Because I thought leaving the company would finally let me escape what I'd done. Instead, that's when the guilt actually started becoming impossible to ignore. I left the company about 18 months later. Officially, it was restructuring. Leadership changes. Burnout. Better opportunity. All of that was technically true. But none of it was the full truth. The full truth is I wanted distance. Not just from the job. From Dana. From the version of myself that existed inside those walls. I remember packing up my office and feeling something that I told myself was relief. Boxes. Files. Personal photos coming off the desk. That strange hollow echo when a space that used to define your identity starts to empty out. I thought maybe leaving would reset something inside me. Like geography could erase morality. That's how naive I was about guilt back then. Dana hugged me goodbye. That detail still sits in my head in a way I don't fully understand. Not a cold handshake. Not anger. A real hug. Quick. Professional. Controlled. I'm sure you'll do great there, she said. And I remember thinking she looked tired. But I also remember realizing later I was seeing everything through the filter of my own guilt. Every expression became evidence in my mind. Every pause meant something. Every glance felt loaded. Now I wonder if she was just done. Emotionally done with a situation she couldn't fully name. Because imagine suspecting someone betrayed you professionally but never having proof strong enough to confront it. That kind of uncertainty doesn't leave you. It stays. And I did that to her. That sentence is still hard to say cleanly in my head without trying to soften it. A few months after I left, I heard she left too. Secondhand. Casual conversation with someone who still worked there. They said she'd had a rough stretch afterward. That she needed time to recalibrate. I remember disliking that word immediately. Recalibrate. Corporate language for something knocked your life off balance and now you have to rebuild quietly. I didn't ask questions. That matters. As I could have. But I didn't want details. Details create responsibility. And responsibility creates obligation. And I was still, in some part of me, trying to stay emotionally unaccountable. So I told myself she was fine. People recover. Careers continue. Things smooth out. I repeated that like a mantra. But there was a hollow feeling underneath it that I kept ignoring. 3 years later I started a new job. Different industry. Different people. Different culture entirely. I told myself I was becoming someone new. That's what people say when they want to believe change happens automatically with time. It doesn't. In one of my first weeks there I went to a dinner with senior staff. One of those polished dinners where everyone is technically relaxed but also subtly performing competence. Wine glasses. Soft lighting. Careful conversation. And somewhere in the middle of it somebody mentioned Dana. Just casually. Like she was a normal part of the professional ecosystem. My body reacted before my brain did. Instant tension. And then I heard, oh yeah, she's doing really well now. Landed somewhere great. I nodded like a normal person. Then I heard myself say it. Oh Dana. Yes, we used to work together. She's great. He's great. Like there was nothing underneath that sentence. Like I wasn't carrying anything unspoken. The conversation moved on immediately. Nobody noticed. But I didn't hear the rest of the dinner. I was somewhere else entirely. Driving home that night, one thought kept repeating in my head. Not you did something bad. Not even you made a mistake. Something sharper. You are not a good person. That distinction hit differently. Because mistakes feel fixable. Identity feels permanent. I sat in my driveway for maybe 10 minutes just gripping the steering wheel, not moving. Then I went inside. Poured a glass of wine. Turned on something on TV. Tried to re-enter normal life like nothing had shifted. And I got very good at that. Functioning while carrying something unresolved. But the part that eventually broke that balance wasn't Dana. It was my daughter. And I didn't see that coming at all. Because one conversation with her exposed something in me I had spent years carefully not looking at. My daughter was 12 when all of this happened. She's 19 now. And I didn't realize until recently how much of my identity I built around being the kind of mother who knows what's right. That's the strange thing about parenting. You're not just raising a child. You're constantly performing a version of yourself that feels stable enough for them to lean on. A few months ago she called me after school. She sounded stressed. Not dramatic. Not panicked. Just that tight kind of teenage stress where something social has gone wrong and it feels like the world is slightly off balance. She told me about a situation at school. Friendship. Competition. A small ethical choice that wasn't really small to her. There was information she had that could give her an advantage over someone else. And she was asking me what to do. And I already knew where this was going before she even finished explaining. Mom, what would you do? That sentence. It always lands differently when it comes from your child. Because suddenly it's not theoretical anymore. It's not philosophy. It's personal history. And I answered too quickly. Too cleanly. I said, don't use it. Don't do that. It's not worth it. She was quiet for a second. Then she said, okay. Just like that. But I stayed on the phone a little longer than I needed to. Because I could hear myself in my own voice. That certainty wasn't coming from wisdom. It was coming from memory. From something I had lived through and never properly resolved. After we hung up, I sat on my kitchen floor. I don't even know why the floor specifically. It just felt like the only place I could drop the weight for a second. And I cried. Not loudly. Not dramatically. Just quietly, like something had finally caught up to me. Because she has no idea why I sounded so certain. No idea that her mother wasn't speaking from principle alone. But from something much messier. Experience shaped by regret. The voicemail came later. About 2 years ago. Unknown number. Parking lot. Grocery store bags in the backseat. One of those completely ordinary moments where nothing feels significant yet. I almost didn't answer. Something made me press play anyway. And then I heard her voice. Hey, it's Dana. Everything in my body went cold instantly. Not metaphorically. Physically. Like my nervous system recognized something before my mind could catch up. For a second I wasn't 40-something in a parking lot. I was back there. Back in the meetings. The document. The quiet shifts in perception I told myself didn't matter. And I thought, this is it. I thought she was finally going to confront me. And part of me thought I deserved that. But she didn't sound angry. That's what confused me most. He sounded tired. Not broken. Not bitter. Just someone who had carried something for a long time and finally put it down enough to speak normally again. She said she'd been thinking about me. Said she hoped I was well. And then there was this pause. Just a small one. A breath I could hear clearly. And then she said she'd been angry for a long time. But she wasn't anymore. My grip tightened on the steering wheel without me even realizing it. She said she'd landed somewhere good in her life. That things had worked out in ways she didn't expect. And then she said, I want to let it go. That sentence. Whatever happened between us, I want to let it go. Not what you did. Not what you took from me. Just vague enough to hold both of us inside it. And then the message ended. No anger. No accusation. No closure in the way I expected. Which somehow made it heavier. Because if she needed to let it go, then she had been carrying something. And I knew what that something was. I didn't call her back. That's the part that still sits in my chest differently than everything else. At first I told myself I needed time. That I should respond carefully. That I didn't want to make it about me. Days passed. Then weeks. And eventually silence became its own decision. I drafted messages over and over. I'm sorry. Thank you for calling. I've thought about this too. But none of them felt clean. Because I couldn't tell anymore whether reaching out was for her. Or for me. And that uncertainty paralyzed me more than guilt ever did. So I kept the voicemail. 6 listens total. Maybe 7. Always stopping before the end, sometimes just to avoid the emotional impact of that final pause. Does that pause? That tiny gap at the end of her message. Is what I think about most. Not what she said. What she almost said. or what I imagined she might have meant. And I don't know if that's truth or projection anymore. Because a few months after that voicemail, I found something that removed the last comfortable excuse I had left. A few months ago, I was cleaning out old digital folders. I'm one of those people who keeps everything. Old resumes, archived emails, random desktop folders from jobs I left years ago. It's honestly a terrible habit. Or maybe not terrible. Maybe there's a reason I keep things. I found the original document completely by accident. The draft. Before I changed it. And the second I saw the file name, my stomach dropped. I just stared at it for a second without opening it. Because part of me already knew what was about to happen. I opened it. Then I pulled up the final version beside it. Side by side. And I sat there for a long time just reading both of them over and over. Honestly, I think some part of me expected the differences to look bigger after all these years. Like maybe my guilt had exaggerated the whole thing. Maybe I'd built this massive emotional narrative around edits that barely mattered. But the opposite happened. The changes were tiny. Tiny. That's what destroyed me. 2 sentence adjustments. 2 attribution shifts. Barely noticeable unless you knew exactly what you were looking for. But the implication underneath them? Completely different. One version framed Dana as more central. The other framed me that way. Subtle hierarchy changes. The kind executives absorb unconsciously. That's the thing about corporate environments people outside them don't always understand. Decisions are rarely made from one giant obvious moment. They're made from accumulation. Tone. Perception. Repeated impressions. And I knew that. That's what became impossible to deny while staring at those files again. I knew exactly what I was doing. For years I protected myself with ambiguity. Maybe it was emotional. Maybe it was impulsive. Maybe I didn't fully realize the impact. But looking at those documents again, I remembered the precision. I remembered choosing specific wording because I understood how it would land. That realization hit differently than guilt. Guilt still leaves room for confusion. This didn't. This was clarity. And clarity can feel brutal. I think most people want morality to feel clean. Good people. Bad people. Simple categories. But life doesn't really work that way, does it? Because I'm not a monster. I love my daughter. I've shown up for friends in hospitals. I've helped people through divorces. I remember birthdays. I donate money when people are struggling. I've spent years trying to be dependable and kind and emotionally available. I did this. Knowingly. That contradiction has become harder to carry as I've gotten older. When I was younger, I honestly thought unethical people looked obviously unethical. Like there would be something visibly colder about them. Now I think most harmful decisions happen in very human moments. Fear. Insecurity. Competition. Panic. And at 38 I was terrified. Not just of losing the promotion. Of what losing it would mean. Because I had sacrificed so much of myself to become successful that failure suddenly felt personal. Existential almost. Like if I didn't get that role, then maybe all the missed dinners and late nights and stress hadn't added up to anything meaningful. And once I started thinking that way, I became capable of things I used to judge in other people. That realization scares me. So, my therapist asked me something recently that I haven't been able to answer. He said, "What would accountability look like if it wasn't centered around making you feel better?" I just sat there. Because every version I imagine still circles back to relief for me somehow. Calling Dana. Confessing fully. Apologizing directly. On paper those sound morally correct. But what if they're actually selfish? What if I just want someone to tell me I'm forgiven so I can stop carrying this version of myself around? And if that's true, is that really accountability? Or is it just emotional outsourcing? I genuinely don't know anymore. That's the part nobody tells you about guilt as you get older. Eventually it stops feeling dramatic and starts feeling philosophical. You stop asking, "Was I wrong?" And start asking, "What does a person actually owe after they've done something wrong?" I still don't have an answer. A few weeks after finding the files, I almost called Dana. Actually dialed the number. My heart was pounding so hard it felt ridiculous. 45 years old, standing alone in my kitchen terrified of a phone call. It rang once. And I hung up. Cowardly. Probably. But underneath the fear was another feeling too. Something uglier. I realized part of me still wanted ambiguity. Because as long as we never fully discussed it out loud, there was still space for interpretation. Space to believe maybe she didn't know everything. Maybe she only suspected. The second I confessed directly, all of that would disappear. And realizing I still wanted that protection after all these years made me feel worse than almost anything else. Because even now, some part of me is still trying to survive the truth instead of fully facing it. And that's when I finally understood something that completely changed how I see myself. And honestly, how I see other people too. For a long time, I thought the worst thing I did was change the document. That's the clean version of the story, right? Woman makes unethical decision. Woman feels guilty afterward. Simple. Contained. But the older I get, the more I think the real damage was what happened afterward. How easily I absorbed it into my normal life. Because nobody confronted me directly. Nothing exploded publicly. There were no dramatic consequences. So I adapted. That's the word that keeps bothering me lately. Adapted. I kept making dinner. Kept helping my daughter with homework. Kept mentoring younger women at work. Kept laughing at parties. Kept being seen as trustworthy. And every normal day after that quietly reinforced the idea that maybe a person could do something harmful and still continue functioning almost completely unchanged. That's what scares me now. Not that I was capable of one bad decision. That I was capable of folding it into myself and continuing on. I used to think guilt would feel louder than this. I thought truly bad choices would destroy your ability to feel normal afterward. But sometimes guilt is just background static. Manageable if you stay busy enough. And I stayed very busy for years. Until little things started breaking through. My daughter asking for advice. That voicemail. The files. Tiny moments that slowly made the story impossible to keep packaging neatly inside my own head. A few months ago, my daughter said something in the car that I still think about almost every day. We were driving home at night. Music low. Completely ordinary conversation. She was talking about a professor she admired and she said, "She seems like exactly who she pretends to be." Such a simple sentence. But I felt it physically. Exactly who she pretends to be. I remember gripping the steering wheel tighter because suddenly I wondered if anyone would describe me that way. Would my daughter? Would my husband? Would Dana have, before all of this? And then another thought hit me immediately after that. Do I even know which version of me is real anymore? The woman who manipulated a situation because she was scared? Or the woman who spent 7 years agonizing over it afterward? Which one defines me more? I honestly don't know. And maybe that uncertainty is part of what I've earned. There's a quote somebody told me years ago that I haven't been able to stop thinking about lately. They said the people who should scare you aren't usually the ones who do terrible things and feel nothing afterward. Those people are rare. The people who should scare you are the ones who know something is wrong, feel guilty, understand the harm, and still do it anyway. Because afterward, those people often look completely normal. They build careers, raise children, become dependable, give good advice. They carry the contradiction privately. That quote used to feel philosophical to me. Now it feels personal. Because I became someone capable of emotionally understanding harm while still causing it. And once you realize that about yourself, every moral certainty starts feeling less stable. You stop seeing humanity in categories. Good people. Bad people. It becomes messier than that. More uncomfortable. You start realizing most people are probably closer to ethical lines than they want to believe. And sometimes all it takes is fear. Or ego. Or wanting something badly enough. I still haven't deleted the voicemail. Or the documents. Both are still there. And I think part of me keeps them because I no longer trust my instinct to erase things that make me uncomfortable. For years I told myself the edits barely mattered. Then I saw the files again and remembered exactly how intentional they were. For years I told myself Dana probably forgot. Then she called me. For years I thought guilt itself proved something good about me. Now I'm not sure guilt guarantees anything at all. Maybe what matters is what you do next. But that's the problem. I still don't know what the right next thing actually is. Call her? Leave her alone? Confess fully? Accept that some things stay unresolved forever? Every option feels selfish in a different direction. And maybe that's why I've stayed stuck. Sometimes late at night I replay the end of her voicemail. That tiny pause before she hangs up. I've become obsessed with it in a way that probably isn't healthy. Because I keep imagining alternate endings. Maybe she almost said, "I forgive you." Maybe she almost said, "I know exactly what you did." Or maybe she wasn't going to say anything at all, and I've projected meaning onto silence because I need this story to resolve somehow. I honestly don't know. But I think about that pause more than almost anything else. Because so much of life changes inside things people don't say. The withheld sentence. The unasked question. The tiny edit nobody challenges. Lives shift there. Quietly. I don't think I'm a monster. But I also don't think I was the person I wanted to believe I was. Maybe both things can exist at the same time. Maybe adulthood is realizing morality isn't clean. It's complicated and disappointing and deeply human. I thought telling this story might create clarity. Instead, it feels like I finally opened a drawer I'd kept shut for years. And now everything inside it is sitting out in the light. Still unresolved. Still uncomfortable. Still mine. I'm 45 years old. And I still don't fully know what kind of person I am. Maybe that uncertainty is the punishment. Or maybe it's finally the beginning of being honest. And the strangest part? Sometimes I still reach for my phone like I'm finally going to call her back. Not because I think it'll fix anything. I don't think this kind of thing gets fixed. But because part of me still wants to hear her voice again. And figure out what was sitting inside that last pause before she hung up. I've replayed it so many times now I practically know the silence by memory. That tiny hesitation. That almost sentence. And maybe that's what stays with you after you do something wrong. Not the moment itself. Not even the consequence. The silence afterward. The part where life keeps moving, and you realize you still have to live with the version of yourself who made the choice. I kept the voicemail for 3 years. I think maybe I already knew why.